if you've been living under a rock, you may not have noticed that Russia seems to have rolled out a new type of battle tank onto the Ukrainian front lines. But what is this weird looking vehicle that Ukrainians are calling the Rolling Barn? We're going to talk about why Russia has done so, and we're going to join a Ukrainian soldier taking a tour of this vehicle. Let's get into it. Okay, so this is actually coming to us from the Sun, but it's from the Ukrainian Armed Forces. They've captured one of Russia's turtle tanks, is what they're calling them. And they're going to take us through a little tour of the turtle tank, breaking down just what exactly Russia is doing here. So this is one of Russia's turtle tanks, and you can see that it's kind of a hot mess. This is all sort of improvised armor. You can see literally just quick patchy welds here holding these armored plates in front of, setting them off from the hull of the tank. Under here looks like the chassis of a T-72 though, a standard Soviet main battle tank.
Очень проблематично с него вылезти.
Okay, so here's some breakdowns I want to talk about. First off, this brief look appears to be the driver's hatch, and you can see that it's very, very obscured here. What I will say is the driver's hatch in a vehicle like an MRAP, which also was meant to withstand direct hits from RPGs and other anti-armor weapon systems, also was comparably small. But because the MRAP was purpose-built, they often relied on kind of having an angle to the windshield, like a really steep angle, so that the RPG was unlikely to have an angle of attack that allowed for optimal penetration. Instead, everything would be a glancing blow. But because the T-72 is a Soviet-made design, you can see this is just a flat window with a really small viewport, further obscured by this RPG cage. And what this is meant to do, generally, when you see this kind of caged offset, is meant to cause an RPG or another armor penetrating weapon to detonate prematurely, because you can think of these kind of anti-armor weapons as having two phases. The first penetrates through the armor of the vehicle, and then a secondary charge or a secondary element actually like flows through the hole that the first part has made, right? Think of it as a explosive version of drilling and then flooding into the hole. So by causing the RPG or other anti-tank system to detonate early, it makes a hole, but then there's nothing for it to flood into, right? You see how it might detonate against this and then flood into open air, really defeating the whole purpose of the two-phased like attack system. The U.S. military actually piloted in Iraq and Afghanistan something similar called RPG Defeat Net. You can see it here. We actually had these on our vehicles fielded when we were in Afghanistan. And you could see you're like, wow, this driver has the same experience. Yes, these RPG nets are absolutely insufferable. They get caught on things all the time and ripped off constantly. But they actually are nets with little metal studs in them. And the idea is that these studs will hit an RPG tip when it penetrates. Now, it has a low chance of succeeding when the RPG penetrates straight on, but if it's at an angle, which is generally how ambushes work, right? They're generally fired at an angle to the target. They're highly likely to detonate the RPG prematurely. So this is a tried and true kind of system that the Russians are sort of field expedited.
Очень проблематично с него вылезти, когда в полном обвесе. Неудобный, очень маленький люк.
Yeah, so he's saying the hatches, but this is a problem of the T-72 in general, right? Those Ukrainians also have these T-72s. But remember, body armor was not something that the Soviets were issuing in 72, right? They issued infantry troops body armor in 89 when they invaded the Soviet Union, but it was very bulky body armor. was actually kind of interesting to see. Let's see if I can pull it up for you guys. It's like the Soviet-Afghan war body armor was actually could defeat. Oh, here it is. Here it is. Okay, so this is kind of the body armor here, right? This is a 6B3. Here's another example of earlier body armor, 6B2. You can see the 6B3 is actually like a prototype almost of a plate carrier with, well, plates, ballistic plates, and integrated magazine pouches. Interesting stuff, right? But this was designed on the eve of the Soviet-Afghan War. Oh, introduced in service, in 81. So a decade before the T-72 was even put out. But this would have been only issued to infantry troops. Let's see if I can find the actual protection level. Right? Close me technical documentation. Right? It was made of a synthetic Kevlar. 6B1. Okay. All right. Artillery shell fragments. Okay, in 71, it was made bulletproof. Here we go. The early ones had titanium alloy plates, but it was 12 kilograms. Right? The high protective properties of the 6B2. It stopped 100% of fragments and 42% of bullets. That's pretty good. It was very insufficient protection against small arms rounds. And if the injury actually got more severe if a bullet hit the armored panel at the right angle. And of course, it was very, very, very hot. Right? And of course, the 6B3 introduced even better protection. But the point is that these big, bulky vests, they were not meant for tankers. And so this T-72 hatch is meant for just a small, a Soviet-era man, underfed and not wearing any kind of armor.
Видимости очень мало.
This looks like a tank that was made in a Soviet factory in 72, yeah.
Мало хто старався. Легенько, бистро, на бистру руку, то все нашили, склепали і відправили на лінію фронту.
Right. Now, you notice here there's a couple of things, right? I think a big part of this armor is meant to prematurely detonate FPV drones, especially. And you notice here that an FPV drone, if it were to detonate against this steel grating, would send fragments into the tank, but it would not penetrate the tank itself. And we've seen that FPV drones often are just RPG rounds that are strapped to drones that are flown into tanks. You can see this armor's pretty thin, and here's an example of the view from above. If you're an FPV drone operator, this is what you might see looking at this tank. Again, prematurely detonate if you don't get the angle just right, and allowing the tank to continue to survive in combat. You can see, I'm going to show up another still here. This is the actual tank. It was captured by the 72nd Mech Brigade of Ukraine, and also referred to as a barn tank, right? Because, well, that's kind of what it looks like, a big barn. The vehicle, sorry, I can't show it to you because this is combat footage. Oh wait, these are the Ukrainians checking out. Sorry, this is the Ukrainians checking it out. It's after it's been abandoned. The vehicle was built from a rusted T-70. Oh, it's a T-62 to have a metal shell as its exterior. Sorry, I'm just making sure that there's not combat footage. Right. They also say there's a cage. Oh, and it also has electronic warfare devices, jammers, drone jammers attached to it. Soldiers told Reuters after it was captured this week. This is really interesting for a bunch of reasons. Okay, here we go. The Ukrainians have captured it. It's not combat footage. Please relax. YouTube, don't demonetize me, please. And also, guys, if you want to support the channel and you want to support me and you need some energy to make it through the day, you guys don't need to strap an armor kit to your existing tank. You just need some strike gum, 90 milligrams of caffeine in every piece. That's as much as an amp energy, as much as a Red Bull, but it has zero sugar. You can get yours at strikegum.com or on Amazon. Just search Strike Gum. And Best of all, it's made here in the USA, veteran owned, using only natural caffeine, none of the weird lab made encapsulated stuff. So thanks to everybody that's picked some up and that has left us the reviews on Amazon. You guys know that stuff is essential. So check it out. Links in the description. Okay, so there's the captured tank. Here it is up close. Look, they just have this one light here. They've got their tank. They do, this is, it is ramshackle. This looks like it was made out of scavenged parts, possibly armor on other troops, but more likely just something from like a steel plant. It looks like it's been cut from scavenged steel. And here's what I'm going to say. Before you sit and judge the Russians for this, it's really important to point out that this exact process was already occurred in 2003 in the United States military, right? The U.S. military, right? The most well-funded military in the world, even at the time, famously deployed Humvees to Iraq. And after the initial invasion and the Iraqi military was defeated, soldiers found that they were doing patrols in secure areas in Humvees where they would get hit with ambushes by insurgents carrying RPGs. They're not rocket propelled grenades. I don't know why they say that. RPGs and small arms. Suddenly, those Humvees, which were meant to be behind the lines vehicles, were suddenly in the thick of combat. And the U.S. military also knew this happened in Mogadishu in the early 90s. So the U.S. military knew for 10 years that Humvees were being treated like combat vehicles, but were not equipped with the protective armor to make them actually combat effective, right? They would have a turret or a hole where a turret could go for a basic protection, but nothing more than that. And oftentimes they wouldn't even have that, right? So and in addition to RPGs, of course, there were also improvised explosive devices, snipers shooting high caliber weapons that would just punch right through Humvee's thin aluminum doors, right? The Humvee, of course, they say was not designed for combat, but as early as 96, people inside the Pentagon said the Army needed to develop a vehicle that would actually protect soldiers who were conducting operations behind the line. Again, the experience in Somalia, Black Hawk Down, should have taught the military that the Humvee was not going to cut it in the war of the future. But nobody listened, right? By 2004, almost 80 soldiers had been killed by insurgents planting roadside bombs, and soldiers said that even small upgrades to the armor, right? So there were some Humvees with like rudimentary armor upgrades, but the U.S. military, U.S. troops were welding their own armor, jury-rigging scrap metal onto the doors of unprotected Humvees. At the same time, military contractors in Iraq were able to purchase things like the Rhino Runner. And even more embarrassingly, the U.S. military already had an MRAP that they just didn't want to use because it was bad, because the general said that it wasn't an infantry vehicle, right? Literally, Donald Rumsfeld himself got called out by troops who were going to Iraq, and they said, hey, why do we have to rely on what they called hillbilly armor, scrounged from junkyards to protect themselves? It was politically embarrassing for the administration, who finally decided to do something. And I want to point out that the U.S. military had the M1117 Guardian, the armored security vehicle. The armored security vehicle was for exactly this purpose. The military police doctrinally, even as early as 97, said, listen, it's our job to fight insurgencies, guerrilla movements, and special forces, enemy special forces that operate behind the lines. So we need a vehicle that can drive on regular roads, but is resistant to enemy mines, resistant to RPGs, and can fight back with a powerful turret. The military police basically pushed and pushed and pushed to get this M1117 adopted, right? Notice the shape of the hull. It's got a V-shaped hull. The interesting part is that, the military, U.S. Army military police had been using a similar vehicle in the Vietnam War for exactly the same reason as they needed it in Iraq, because they said, oh, the Viet Cong operate behind the lines but they keep hitting us with, ambushes. So we need a better combat vehicle. And so many generals, though, didn't really think the ASV was necessary, doubted the benefits, but military police corps tasked with patrolling the safer areas behind the battle line insisted that the Army fund at least a slow but steady production of the armored the M1114 Humvees, and then in 99 began to buy 1117s for the military police corps, right? Field tested in Kosovo. And then in 2002, right before the U.S. Army needed it the most, it was canceled, right? Of course, the ASV was $800,000 a pop, which is still a fraction of the cost of an MRAP, right? And when the Iraq War began, the U.S. Army had just 49 ASVs, 49 vehicles that could actually resist an IED. And they were all assigned to MP units. MP units used them in the combat zone and said, wow, we're so much safer. In fact, MP doctrine, even when I was in, was to lead your convoy with the ASV, because that way, if it hit an IED, that crew had the best chance of surviving, right? Soldiers who used the M1117s and some members of Congress visiting Iraq favored them over other mine-protected vehicles like the garbage Humvees. Of course, classic, the U.S. Army uncanceled the program in the mid-2000s, increased production 40-fold, and knocked out a blistering 56 vehicles a month. And then the production plant, which was in New Orleans, was damaged by Hurricane Katrina, shutting manufacturing. So just a classic military boondoggle. The point is that the U.S. military went through all this nonsense already, right? They went through the same thing. U.S. troops welding armor to their vehicles because their armor didn't respond to the actual threat in the real environment. And someone in Russia, hopefully, is taking these field expedient changes and executing them into a real survivable tank. The water bottles. Strapping the water bottles to the outside. This is also a classic move. It's probably hot as all get out in there in the summer. So the Russian troops are probably like, listen, strap them to the outside because it's pretty cramped in there as it is.
Я навіть не знаю, з чого вона зроблена. Мають защиту.
Right? This says, interestingly, they even included a skirt to protect the tracks.
Снаряд, який
and you see, it repelled the shell. Someone hit this thing in the tracks, and it was protected. So the turtle tank actually worked.
Бачимо, що його трошки покосило. І це дуже їм допомагає в тому, що не можна залетіти і попасти в гусянку, щоб зупинити техніку. Це теж для них був плюс на якийсь маленький період часу.
Now, you may notice there's a problem with this tank. It can't rotate. Right? Tanks have a turret that spins 360 degrees. Not this one.
Так, так, так.
Damn, that is so cramped. More water. I mean, it looks so hot in there. Remember, the Soviets designed their tank to defend Eastern Europe, which I guess Ukraine they would be expected to fight in, but Ukraine is probably the hottest environment they realistically expected to fight in, the southernmost reaches. So this idea that they probably didn't engineer a lot of cooling in there. They just want to make sure their crew wouldn't literally die of heat stroke.
Огромный состав и шел с 62-ками в направлении. Вот такая.
Again, that also looks like a 1970s can of something. Looks like there's a cow on it, so it must be like beef. Right, there's a Ukrainian air defense vehicle. I think it's Ukrainian. This also looks like a very old school air defense vehicle. Something from like the 60s. Nope. Okay, wait. Let's see if I can show this. Okay, here we go. This is just a training exercise. Don't demonetize me, YouTube. Here, let's see. Let's talk to this guy.
Відстібнути короб.
Oh my gosh, this is so old school.
Витягнути його. Вже якби вони не були дуже такі, ну...
Yeah, no matter how effective these guns are, they're outdated and need updating. Okay, so here's what I'm going to say. One, remember, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? You might recall the U.S. military using the M2 Browning 50 cal, something that was designed in, I think 1902. Yeah, the M2 Browning was designed in 1933. And this thing was a staple on top of Humvees. In fact, you can see this 50 cal also being used in Ukrainian vehicles today, almost 100 years later. I mean, look at this. Look at this list of wars. World War II, Indonesian National Revolution, Korean War, Indochina War, Suez Crisis, Vietnam War, Colombia, Dominican Civil War, Afghanistan, Iraq, Syrian Civil War, War in Iraq, Russo-Ukrainian War, Yemeni Civil War. They can't get enough of it, right? The fascinating part to me is that they haven't upgraded the design. Nobody thinks the design needs improving, which is kind of crazy. So the point is that it can be both outdated and also highly effective.
Ефективні ці зушки, вони все одно вже застарілі і потребують модернізації якої-не-якої. Це такі ті ж гепарди б'ють по висоті 3.
Right. This is a old school manual anti-aircraft radar, but they say that Gepard's German-made radar-guided autocannon, right? So the German weapons, and these are outdated German weapons, by the way, but they're less outdated. The German weapons will use radar. The radar will always be scanning, detecting things like drones or missiles in flight. And when it detects a drone, it goes, yo, we found it. And it automatically calculates a trajectory for the rounds, points the weapons at them, and then usually awaits human authorization to fire, right? But this is just human beings eyeballing it.
Кілометр з половиною плюс. Мають програмовані снаряди. І на знищення одної повітряної цілі потрібно набагато менше. Так випускаєш там 200 снарядів і...
Interesting. This says it's radar guided. Look at the size of these shells, by the way. Look at these things. These things are monsters. Right? But this is such an old school air defense move. Anyway, that's not what we're here for. We're here for the turtle tank. I'm not going to eat up more of your time. Maybe we'll save this for later. But that is all I had for today, guys. Thank you so much for joining me. Be sure to like the video if you thought this was good analysis. It really does help. It tells YouTube algorithm that this is good content. And please subscribe to the channel. That also helps. Thanks to the Colonel tier members of Combat Vet News. Thanks to our Lieutenant tier members. And I will see you guys in the next one. Cheers.